Have you ever been left behind by someone who believed you'd crumble without them? Someone who walked away so confidently, as if your heart was disposable, your presence replaceable? We've all been there. And maybe, right now, you're there. Too, staring at the silence, questioning your worth, wondering why the pain runs so deep when they seem completely unbothered. But here's a question most never ask. What if the silence you're sitting in is not weakness, but the beginning of your power? What if what hurts now is actually what heals you later? There's a lie we've been sold over and over again, that if you love someone, you must chase them, that begging for closure is normal, that reacting with emotion is proof of depth. But what if that's all wrong? What if those beliefs are exactly what's keeping you stuck in suffering, while they live unchallenged by consequence? See, most people don't expect you to be strong in your silence. They expect the calls, the late-night messages, the apologies and confessions. But what happens when none of that comes? What happens when you choose not to play the game? What if your quiet isn't surrender, it's sovereignty? What I'm about to share with you is not just another motivational pep talk. It's not about revenge, and it's not about pretending you're fine. This is about transformation, about how the very silence they didn't anticipate is becoming their undoing. It's about Stoic relationships, how detachment, clarity, and radical self-respect become your greatest tools in navigating heartbreak with your dignity intact. And trust me, they never saw it coming. In the next few minutes, you'll see how each moment of your stillness is reshaping the power dynamic they thought they owned. You'll understand how their confidence turns to confusion, how their ego quietly crumbles, and how you, without lifting a finger, become the one truly in control. We're not just going to scratch the surface. We're diving into the depths. This is for every soul who has ever been underestimated, every person who gave love that wasn't returned, and every heart learning that sometimes the most profound response is no response at all. So stay with me. Don't click away, because the truth you're about to hear may just change the way you see everything, not just them, but yourself. The silence you feared is about to become your greatest weapon. And by the end of this, you won't be wondering why they left. You'll be thankful they did. 1. The power of detachment. They thought you'd chase, that you'd break down, send desperate texts, spiral in confusion, beg for explanations that never come, cling to hope like it's your last breath. But you didn't. And that's the moment everything shifted. Detachment, in the world of Stoicism, isn't about giving up. It's about letting go of what you cannot control and returning to the one thing you always could, yourself. You see, when someone leaves expecting to be followed, their confidence is often not rooted in truth, but in ego. They believe your worth hinges on their attention. They think their absence is enough to make your world collapse. That's where detachment becomes your greatest form of power. When you choose not to react, when you choose peace over pursuit, you introduce a dissonance into their narrative. They had it all mapped out. You, crushed and confused, trying to stitch things back together, proving your love even when they walked away like it meant nothing. But Stoic relationships are built not on control, but on self-respect. And what you're doing now, choosing silence, choosing stillness, isn't weakness, it's discipline. Detachment doesn't mean you didn't love. It means you finally love yourself more than the idea of someone who didn't value you. It means that even though you're hurting, you won't let that pain dictate your path. So ask yourself, what does it mean to truly let go? Does letting go mean forgetting? Does it mean pretending it never mattered? No. Letting go means allowing things to be what they are without trying to force an outcome that wasn't meant for you. The more you hold on to someone who was comfortable discarding your effort, the more you betray yourself. They thought you'd remain stuck, But every second you remain silent, they begin to feel that unexpected chill, the cold realization that their absence didn't break you. It freed you. And that is terrifying to someone who believed they were essential to your happiness. Detachment is misunderstood. Some people think it's numbness or apathy, but true detachment, the Stoic kind, is the result of profound clarity. You begin to see that chasing someone who walked away doesn't prove your love. It only reveals your fear of being alone. And Stoicism teaches that the only lasting peace comes from being content with solitude. So now they sit with the questions. Why haven't they called? Why aren't they trying to fix this? Did they ever care? They scroll through your social media. They linger on old messages. They wonder why the person who used to bend over backward is now completely still. And that's when it starts to hit them. Maybe they never really knew you. Maybe the power they thought they held was only ever what you gave them. And now that you've taken it back, they feel small, powerless, irrelevant. That's what detachment does. It flips the emotional script. They thought they were the main character, but your silence, your refusal to chase, has rewritten the story. You're no longer the one waiting. You're walking forward, quietly, intentionally, and every step away is louder than 1,000 spoken words. Detachment forces them to deal with their own actions. No explanations, no second chances, no long emotional texts, just the mirror of their own choices. Let them see themselves clearly for the first time, because when you stop reacting, you make them confront what they hope to avoid: accountability. Stoicism doesn't ask you to suppress your pain. It invites you to transcend it. Your suffering, your disappointment, your heartbreak, they're real, but they're not final. They're the fire through which your resilience is forged. And by choosing detachment, you step out of the emotional tug-of-war. You stop investing in someone who treated your heart like it was optional. You take back your energy, your time, your identity. Can you feel it, that small shift inside you? That's your power returning. That's the birth of your healing, not from external validation, but from the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs closure from the one who broke them. They don't understand it. How can someone who once cared so deeply go so quiet? How can you still carry yourself with such calm when they were so sure you'd fall apart? That confusion is their reckoning. That silence is your storm. The truth is you're not pretending to be over it. You're not faking strength. You're becoming it slowly, day by day. And that strength, rooted in Stoicism, in detachment, in the unshakable foundation of self-worth, is not a show. It's who you are now. You've stopped waiting for their return. You've stopped hoping for the apology. You've stopped giving energy to someone who never knew how to hold it. And that is what haunts them. The you that existed when they left, that version is gone. In its place stands someone clearer, calmer, and more whole. They lost the version of you that was willing to fight for something one-sided. And they didn't even realize it. That's the cost of underestimating someone who learns the power of detachment. Do you feel that weight lifting? That is freedom. That is the essence of Stoic relationships. Loving without losing yourself, caring without clinging, letting go without bitterness. Now they wonder if they meant anything to you at all. And isn't that ironic? Because they once left thinking they were the ones walking away with power, but now they see it was never theirs. It was borrowed, and you've taken it back. So hold your silence, hold your calm. Detachment is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new one, written not in desperation, but in dignity. They thought you'd chase. They were wrong. Now they're suffering, and you're just getting started. That's the power of detachment. That's the strength of Stoicism. That's the truth of Stoic relationships. 2. The change within you that they never saw coming. They thought they knew you. They believed that when they walked away, they were leaving behind someone who would stay exactly the same, stuck in longing, desperate for answers, suspended in heartbreak. They assumed that time would freeze for you, that you'd keep replaying old conversations, rereading old messages, hoping for their return. But they never considered one thing, that pain can be alchemy. That heartbreak, in the hands of someone determined to heal, doesn't destroy, it transforms. You didn't stay broken. You didn't let their absence define your worth. You turned inward, faced your reflection, and chose the path they never imagined you'd walk. You began to evolve, and that is where everything began to unravel. For them. Because the version of you they left behind no longer exists. You are no longer the person who tolerated inconsistency, who made excuses for mistreatment, who settled for half love. You are no longer the one who gave endless chances to someone who barely gave you effort. You have changed, and your growth is their grief. They don't just miss your presence, they miss the power they had over the version of you who hadn't, yet discovered their strength. That person, the one who would wait, who would hurt quietly, who would respond to every breadcrumb, they are gone. You're not angry, you're not seeking revenge, you're just unbothered. And that is what disturbs them the most. Growth, real growth, doesn't announce itself, it doesn't scream for attention, it shows up quietly, in how you carry yourself, in the calm of your silence, in the clarity of your boundaries. They thought you'd be waiting, but instead you were rising. And now they look back and realize they walked away from someone who was only going to get better without them. That's the part they never prepared for. See, people often think they can leave and come back to the same version of you they left behind. They expect time to hold space for them, but time doesn't wait, and neither did you. While they were gone, you started showing up for yourself. You started doing the inner work. You started healing the wounds they never took the time to understand. You started learning to validate your own worth instead of seeking it in someone else's approval. And in doing that, you became a version of yourself that no longer fits the mold they tried to keep you in. The one who overextended, who overexplained, who overgave. That chapter is closed. This new version of you doesn't chase. You don't beg to be understood. You don't exhaust yourself trying to convince someone of your value. You know it now. And when you walk with that kind of certainty, it shakes people, especially those who once underestimated you. They thought they had you figured out. That's the thing about ego. It assumes consistency in others while failing to account for change in self. And now their certainty is cracking. They scroll through your updates, trying to decode your silence, looking for traces of the old you. But all they find is peace. And that peace, that absence of chaos, tells them everything. You're no longer waiting for them to return. You're not even looking in their direction. You've turned inward, onward, forward. And what they once took for granted has become a memory they can't outrun. The change within you wasn't just cosmetic. It wasn't a new haircut, a fitness routine, or a curated social media highlight reel. No. Your transformation started in your mindset, in how you speak to yourself when no one is listening, in how you no longer base your happiness on the presence of someone who didn't choose you. You stopped rehearsing old pain. You stopped mourning a future they never intended to build with you. You stopped trying to rewrite the ending. Instead, you picked up the pen and started a new story, one where you are no longer a supporting character in someone else's life, but the author of your own. That's what Stoicism teaches us, that we are not victims of circumstance, but masters of our response. And in that stillness, you've become sovereign. This is the essence of Stoic relationships: growth without attachment, love without dependency, resilience without bitterness. They notice it now, the glow, the self-assurance, the lightness in your energy, and they don't know what to do with it. Because they thought they were unforgettable. They thought their absence would echo in your life forever, but now it's their ego that's echoing, and not in triumph, but in confusion. They wonder, How did you move on so easily? How did you rebuild so quickly? But they're asking the wrong questions. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick. You just chose to rise instead of remain. You chose to embrace the silence not as punishment, but as a sacred space for reflection. And in that silence, you met yourself again. Not the self defined by their approval, but the self built on clarity, intention, and unshakable inner peace. And that self, that's the version they never expected. That's the version they didn't believe you could become. Now they sit in their own silence. Not because they've chosen it, but because they've been shut out of the life they once took for granted, and that absence, it burns. It forces them to reconcile with the truth that the person they walked away from was the best thing they never valued. And now that you've changed, they don't know how to reach you because the door isn't just closed, it's been replaced. And they don't have the key. Your transformation wasn't for them, it was for you. But its impact echoes in their world now, not because you intended to hurt them, but because your growth invalidates their assumptions. You are no longer the person who needed them, and they are no longer relevant to who you are becoming. That's not cruelty, that's evolution. And evolution, in the lens of Stoicism, isn't loud or vengeful. It's deliberate, intentional, whole. So if you're sitting there wondering if they've noticed, they have. If you're questioning whether they regret it, they do. But none of that matters anymore, because the old you might have needed their recognition. But the new you only need your own. So keep moving, keep growing. Let your transformation be your closure. Let your silence be your story. They thought you'd chase, but instead you changed. And that change is louder than any words you could have spoken. If this resonates with you, take a moment and support this message. Like the video, drop a comment that says #1 if you're embracing your evolution, and subscribe. For more insights rooted in Stoicism and Stoic relationships, your journey matters, your growth is real, and your power is only just beginning. 3. The illusion of control has shattered. They believed they had the upper hand. That's what people often assume when they walk away without explanation, when they ghost, when they leave someone who gave their heart fully. In their mind, they carried the power, the ability to withdraw, love, to dictate timing, to control the narrative. They believed you were dependent on their presence, that your identity was somehow wrapped around their attention. This illusion of control isn't always intentional. Sometimes it's rooted in a fragile ego that mistakes care for weakness, that interprets vulnerability as something to be used rather than cherished. But Stoicism teaches us that no one truly controls another, not emotionally, not mentally, not spiritually, unless that power is freely surrendered. And you? You stopped surrendering. You stopped handing over pieces of your peace just to keep someone comfortable in their superiority. You stopped feeding a cycle where their silence demanded your reaction, where their absence created chaos in your world. The moment you chose not to engage, not to respond, not to chase, that was the fracture. That's when the illusion of control began to fall apart. Because control in relationships, especially in Stoic relationships, doesn't come from dominance. It comes from reciprocity, mutual respect, and shared presence. When they left, they assumed you'd beg for clarity. They thought you'd spiral into questions, search for closure, stay emotionally tethered to a connection they treated as disposable. But your silence, grounded not in spite but in strength, began speaking volumes. It told them, without a single word, that you weren't playing by the script they wrote. And when you deviate from someone's expectations, especially when those expectations involve emotional control, it disorients them. It challenges their entire perception of who they believed you were, and more importantly, who they believed they were to you. Suddenly, they're not as sure, not as confident, not as in control, because they expected a version of you that no longer exists. They expected to be chased, and instead they are ignored. They expected to be begged for love, and instead they are met with indifference. And what that does to a person who thrives on feeling needed, it dismantles them slowly, quietly, permanently. The truth is, they may not even understand what they're feeling at first. They may dismiss it as confusion or frustration, but underneath it all is a deeper, more unsettling emotion. Fear. Fear that they were wrong. Fear that they overestimated their importance. Fear that you were never as dependent as they thought. And this fear breeds doubt. Doubt that creeps into their thoughts when they check their phone and see no messages from you. Doubt that lingers when they wonder why you're not reaching out. Doubt that grows into regret when they realize they're the only one holding on to a power that no longer exists. That's what the absence of control does. It reveals the truth, that they never really had power over you. They had access, and access can be revoked. Stoicism reminds us that our emotions are ours to govern, that no one can steal our peace unless we leave it unguarded. And now you're guarding it like never before. You're no longer reactive, you're reflective. You're not chasing answers, you're finding truth in your stillness. And that stillness, that refusal to perform the expected reaction, is what shatters the illusion they clung to. They start to see you not as the one who was left behind, but as the one who walked away from the game. And there is no greater loss for someone who seeks control than to realize they have none. The more you detach, the clearer it becomes. The control they thought they had was only ever as real as your willingness to allow it. And now that you've reclaimed your power, they're left with only their assumptions, and those assumptions are crumbling. They question everything. Did they misjudge your devotion? Were you really ever as attached as they believed? Or was your love rooted in choice, not need? That distinction matters, because when love is a choice, it can be withdrawn. When care is conscious, it can be redirected, and they never anticipated that you would redirect it toward yourself, that you would take the love you used to pour into them and invest it in your own healing, your own growth, your own becoming. Now they feel it, the emptiness where control used to be, the silence where validation once flowed, and there, left trying to rebuild a version of reality where they're still the one in charge. But it's too late. You've outgrown that story. You've stepped into a version of yourself that no longer fits in the palm of someone else's ego. And no matter how hard they try to rationalize it, the facts remain. You didn't chase. You didn't react. You didn't break. And that terrifies them, because control once lost is rarely regained, especially when the other person has discovered something deeper than power, freedom. That's what you found. The freedom to not explain yourself, the freedom to not engage, the freedom to walk away without guilt, knowing you did your part, knowing you showed up with sincerity, and knowing that their inability to appreciate it isn't your burden to carry. This is the turning point in every Stoic relationship. When one person wakes up to the truth that control is an illusion, and the other steps fully into their autonomy. And autonomy isn't aggressive. It doesn't seek to punish or to prove. It simply exists, anchored in clarity, undisturbed by chaos. You are no longer trying to rewrite the past. You are no longer emotionally invested in being understood by someone who never took the time to understand you. You've stepped back not because you're weak, but because you're wise. And that wisdom, earned through silence, refined through reflection, is now your greatest asset. They can feel it, even if they don't admit it. They can feel that. The hold they thought they had has slipped through their fingers, that the story they told themselves about how much you needed them no longer holds weight. And that realization, that's what breaks them, not your words, not your actions, but your absence. The absence of dependence, the absence of attention, the absence of energy. That's the echo they never prepared for. Stoicism teaches us to observe without attachment, to engage without expectation, to love without losing ourselves. And now you are living that lesson. They thought you'd fight for the connection, but you chose to fight for your peace. They thought you'd argue, beg, plead, but you chose silence. They thought they could leave and return on their terms, but you've rewritten the terms entirely. And in doing so, you've shattered not just their illusion of control, but your own former belief that they ever held it. You're not angry, you're not cold, you're simply awake, awake to your value, awake to your patterns, awake to your power. And once awakened, you cannot return to sleepwalking through emotional manipulation. So let them wonder, let them sit with their confusion, let them feel the absence of a control they never truly had. Because what you've built in its place, sovereignty, peace, emotional independence, is unshakable. And that's what Stoic relationships are ultimately about. Not dominance, not submission, but mastery of the self. And you are mastering it quietly, powerfully, unapologetically. They thought they had control. They were wrong. And now they're feeling what happens when illusion meets truth. It shatters, just like the hold they thought they had on you. 4. How ego crumbles in the face of silence. Ego is a fragile thing. It dresses itself in confidence, in control, in the illusion of invincibility. But beneath all that, it's delicate, terrified of being exposed, of being irrelevant, of being ignored. And nothing threatens the ego more than silence. When they walked away, their ego was certain that you'd chase, certain that you'd need to prove your worth, certain that your next move would be driven by a desperation to be seen and heard by them. They didn't consider the possibility that you wouldn't respond at all. They never thought you'd go quiet, because silence to the ego is unbearable. It offers no validation, no reaction, no confirmation that they still matter. The ego can survive conflict. It thrives on it. It can survive arguments, tears, dramatic exits, emotional outbursts. But what it cannot survive is indifference. Stoicism teaches us to remain unmoved by external noise. And in practicing that, you've become what they never expected: untouchable. You didn't reply. You didn't explain. You didn't try to convince them of anything. And now their ego is collapsing under the weight of not knowing where they stand with you. That is the cost of silence. It forces the other person to sit alone with the questions they never had to ask before. Why haven't they reached out? Why don't they seem affected? Was I really not that important to them? That's when doubt begins to sink in. Because the ego relies on predictable patterns, and your silence broke every one of them. You see, they thought they were the prize. They believed that walking away would increase their value in your eyes. They assumed that by creating distance, they would pull you in. But what actually happened was the opposite. The moment you stopped chasing, the pedestal they placed themselves on began to wobble. And when they looked around for your reaction and found only your absence, they were forced to face something terrifying. Maybe they weren't as special as they believed. Maybe the power they thought they held was never real. It was only a reflection of your willingness to care deeply, to show up, to be present. And now that you've withdrawn that energy, the mirror is gone. And all that's left is the truth. Their ego is left naked, unsupported by your validation, starving for a response that never comes. That's the moment ego begins to crumble. Because what they realize now is that your silence isn't passive, it's active. It's not weakness, it's choice. And choice is power. You're no longer seeking to be understood by someone who used your vulnerability to feed their own significance. You've learned to sit with discomfort, to hold your own emotional storms, to choose stillness over self-betrayal. That's what makes you dangerous, not in a vengeful way, but in a calm, grounded, stoic way. You've learned to control your responses, and in doing so, you've become immune to the ego games others try to play. They can't provoke you anymore. They can't bait you into reacting, because your silence is louder than any confrontation could ever be. And they hear it, even if they pretend not to. They hear it in the empty inbox, in the missed calls that never come, in the way your energy no longer reaches out to meet theirs. And they panic, not because they love you, though maybe part of them does, but because their ego is starving. Starving for proof that they still matter to you, even after all they've done. But that proof never arrives, and now they're left spiraling. Their self-importance begins to fade. They begin to wonder if they've overestimated themselves. They begin to feel insignificant, not because you told them they were, but because your silence no longer affirms the inflated image they held of themselves. That's the power of Stoicism. It doesn't need to argue. It doesn't need to be seen. It simply stands in quiet truth. And truth, over time, breaks down illusion. Now they are the ones checking your profile. They are the ones remembering your words. They are the ones analyzing your stillness, trying to decipher its meaning. Because the one who used to respond instantly, who used to explain and soothe and forgive, is gone. And their ego doesn't know how to process that. The withdrawal of your attention has done what no confrontation ever could. It has stripped them of their perceived control. It has forced them to acknowledge that they were never the center of your world. You just gave them space they didn't earn, and that space has been reclaimed. Ego thrives in environments where it feels adored, needed, superior. But your silence has transformed that environment into one of clarity, of autonomy, of detachment. And now, their ego is gasping for air in a space that no longer revolves around it. They thought walking away gave them power, but power that's not rooted in truth cannot endure. And what they now understand, too late, is that the power they believed they held was never about them. It was always about your willingness to give. And now that giving has stopped, now you give to yourself. Now your energy is yours again. That shift, it's not visible on the surface, but it reverberates through every part of your life. Your stillness speaks. It says, I do not chase, I do not beg, I do not lower myself to regain what I never lost. And that message reaches them even in silence, especially in silence. They may not respond. They may pretend not to care, but inside, their ego is cracking, because ego cannot survive in an environment where it is not constantly fed. You've removed the nourishment. You've stopped explaining yourself. You've stopped seeking validation. You've stopped playing the role they cast you in. And now they are lost without a script. What they believed was a predictable cycle has ended, and they are no longer the lead. They are a memory, a moment, a past chapter. Stoicism doesn't demand justice. It doesn't demand revenge. It simply demands self-mastery. And you, by holding your silence, have mastered what they could not: emotional regulation, self-worth without external input, peace in the absence of closure. And now, the irony is this: they're the ones looking for signs. They're the ones hoping you'll break your silence. They're the ones waiting. But that waiting is different. It's not hopeful. It's hollow. Because deep down, they sense the truth. You're not coming back. Not to them. Not to that version of yourself who would have. That person has evolved, grown, transcended. The ego can't follow you there. It's stuck in the past, trying to resurrect a dynamic that no longer exists. And in that space, it breaks. You're not doing this to hurt them. You're not playing games. You're not seeking control. You're just done. And there is nothing more powerful than a person who chooses silence, not from fear, but from understanding. Understanding that peace is not found in proving your worth to someone who refuses to see it. It's found in walking away from the need to be seen at all. So if this resonates with you, if you've felt the quiet power of refusing to feed someone's ego, if you've chosen your peace over their pride, take a second right now, like the video. Comment number 1 if you're walking the path of stoic strength, and subscribe for more insights grounded in stoicism and real emotional power. You're not just watching this, you're living it. And that, right there, is the beginning of a whole new kind of freedom. 5. The weight of regret. Regret is not immediate. It doesn't hit like a sudden storm. It creeps in like a shadow at dusk, slow and quiet, until one day it's all-consuming. When they left, they didn't feel it. In that moment of walking away, their chest was light, their steps confident, their mind filled with justification. Maybe they told themselves they outgrew you. Maybe they believed they could do better. Maybe they convinced themselves that the connection wasn't deep, that you were too much, too little, too emotional, too silent, too anything. But Stoicism teaches us to judge things not by how they begin, but by what endures. And what endures when someone walks away from something genuine is not relief. It's reckoning. At first, they celebrate the freedom. They romanticize the idea of starting over, of chasing novelty, of rewriting their story without you in it. They might talk big, post bold, live loud for a while. But the ego's party is short-lived when it was built on the assumption that you'd always be available, always in orbit, always affected. You weren't supposed to let go. That wasn't part of their plan. They thought your care would anchor you in place. They thought your love was something they could discard and retrieve whenever they pleased. But then time passed. Silence lingered. No texts, no updates, no subtle attempts to stay connected. And suddenly the weight of what they left behind starts to settle into their bones. The memories they once overlooked begin to replay. Not the drama, not the ending, but the small moments. The way you looked at them when they weren't watching. The way you understood their moods without them speaking. The patience in your presence. The comfort of being seen. These aren't things that can be replicated. And that realization doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives in the quiet moments, in the stillness they once craved but now fear. Stoic relationships reveal their power in absence. Your detachment has become their mirror, and in it, they now see their own reflection with startling clarity. They see the moments they dismissed your value. They hear the words they should have said. They remember the softness they responded to with coldness. They recall the support they received without gratitude. And what once felt like an easy decision becomes harder to justify with every passing day. Regret begins as a whisper. Did I do the right thing? But it grows. It grows when they realize that the people they replaced you with lack depth. It grows when they feel misunderstood by those who only see the surface. It grows when their heart doesn't settle the way it used to when it was near yours. It grows when they scroll through old photos or catch the scent of something that reminds them of you. And suddenly, the memory of what they had begins to weigh, heavier than the illusion of what they gained. Regret is not about wanting to return to the past. It's about realizing that something real was lost and can never be reassembled. Because you have changed. They could come back, yes, but they would be returning to a version of you they no longer recognize. The comfort they once took for granted is no longer available to them, not because you're bitter, but because you're better, not better than them, better than you were. And that growth, that inner shift is irreversible. That's the hardest part for them to swallow. The door is not only closed, it's gone. The home they once knew in your heart has been renovated, and their key no longer fits. This is where regret becomes torment. Not just sorrow for what was lost, but the knowledge that they can never go back, that their pride cost them something irreplaceable. Regret is cruel in its timing. It doesn't arrive when there's still time to fix things. It arrives when change has already occurred, when silence has hardened into indifference, when the person they once called theirs no longer thinks of them with longing, but with learned detachment. And this isn't revenge. It's justice of the emotional kind, a justice that Stoicism quietly champions, not out of malice, but out of truth. You didn't orchestrate this regret. You didn't plant it or water it. You simply withdrew. You did the hardest thing a person can do. You accepted what was and stopped trying to change what wasn't yours to fix. And that act, letting go, without noise, without drama, without one last plea, is what set the stage for their realization. They thought you'd always be available, that your kindness was limitless, that your heart was a resource to draw from at their convenience. But what they now understand is that your silence isn't a void, it's a boundary, one they didn't believe you could enforce. And now they sit outside it, watching the life they could have shared unfold without them. Regret becomes heavier in proportion to growth, and you, in their eyes, are radiant now, radiant. Not because you're flaunting your transformation, but because your energy has changed. You're calm, you're grounded, you've reclaimed parts of yourself that were once given away too easily. You walk differently, speak differently, even breathe differently. And they notice, they might not say it, but they notice, and that noticing eats at them piece by piece. This is the weight of regret. It doesn't slam into the chest like heartbreak. It settles in the soul like a slow burn. It visits them at night when distractions fade. It greets them in the morning when they reach for their phone and realize there's still nothing from you. It lingers when they pass places you once went together. It whispers to them in the voice they used to hear in comfort and now hear only in memory. Regret is a quiet kind of suffering, one that doesn't always look like pain, but feels like it. It's the recognition that they had something rare and didn't know how to hold it. And you are no longer there to reassure them. You no longer explain your worth. You no longer carry the burden of their blindness. And they're left to carry it themselves. That's the final weight, the knowledge that you gave them something pure, something true, something whole, and they discarded it. And now that you're gone, no matter how hard they try, they'll never find it again in the same form. Because love rooted in Stoicism isn't clingy or desperate. It's steady, unwavering, intentional. It gives without expecting, but it also knows when to stop giving. And you've stopped, not because your heart closed, but because your eyes opened. And they are just now realizing what they lost when they walked away from someone who would have stayed. That is regret, and it is theirs to bear. 6. Your absence forces them to face themselves. Your presence once served as their mirror, a soft place to land, a comforting reflection they leaned on when their own inner world was too chaotic to face alone. You were steady, consistent, loyal in a way they didn't fully understand until it was gone. But they didn't appreciate it when it mattered. They mistook your steadiness for predictability, your patience for weakness, your consistency for complacency. And when they left, they believed they were leaving behind something replaceable. What they never expected, what they never even considered, was how deafening your absence would be. At first, they embraced the silence. It felt like freedom. They didn't have to answer to anyone. No more emotional accountability, no more vulnerability, no more having to face the truth that someone actually saw them. Not the polished version they show the world, but the raw, unfiltered, flawed version they tried to hide. You saw them, and for a while they liked that. But when the relationship began to demand growth, emotional honesty, and self-awareness, things Stoic relationships naturally foster, they grew uncomfortable. You didn't demand perfection, only presence. You didn't ask them to be more, only to be real. And that scared them because being truly seen is terrifying when you've spent your life hiding. So they ran. And when they did, they thought they were escaping discomfort, but they were only delaying the confrontation. Because now, in the quiet that follows your departure, the mirror is gone, and all that remains is themselves. No one to project on. No one to lean on, no one to validate them through blind devotion. And that is when the reckoning begins. Your absence doesn't just represent loss, it demands reflection. without your presence to soothe their ego or shield them from their own shadows. They are forced to sit with who they are. The distractions don't last. The rebound connections, the social media performances, the temporary thrills, they all fade because they weren't built on truth. They were built on avoidance. But your absence, it lingers. Not because you're haunting them, but because your love came from a place so sincere, so rare, so rooted in grounded presence, that its disappearance leaves behind not just a void, but a challenge to become someone worthy of that kind of love again. And for the first time, they realize how deeply they were seen and how little they saw in return. That realization doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It builds slowly when they wake up and feel that quiet hollowness, when they reach for their phone and instinctively want to share something, but remember there's no one on the other end. When something amazing or painful happens and they catch themselves thinking, I wish I could tell them, but they can't, because you're not there, because you've moved forward, because you've chosen peace over participation. And that absence forces them inward. They begin to recall the kindness you gave without condition, the forgiveness you offered without needing to be begged, the way you listened, the way you stayed. And now, for the first time, they're not distracted by the noise of their ego. Now they feel the silence in full volume, and that silence says, it's time to look at yourself. That's what your absence has become, a mirror they can no longer ignore. A reflection of who they were when they had you and who they failed to become in return. And that mirror doesn't lie. It shows them the truth of their decisions, their patterns, their emotional cowardice. It shows them the immaturity they hid behind charm, the pride that masqueraded as self-respect, the fear they dressed up as independence, and none of it holds up anymore, not without you there to absorb it. This is the weight of growth, but it's not yours to carry. You already did your part. You loved, you gave, you showed up. Now your work is in choosing yourself, in honoring your boundaries, in continuing to evolve. But them, their work has just begun, because your absence has done what your presence never could. It's made them responsible for themselves. That's what Stoicism teaches, not to rescue others from their consequences, but to allow them the dignity of their own reckoning. It's not punishment, it's truth, and truth doesn't chase. It stands, it waits, it remains available only to those ready to face it. Are they ready? Maybe, maybe not. That's no longer your concern. Because your focus is no longer on who they were, it's on who you're becoming. And that's what stings the most. Not just that you're gone, but that you're thriving in your absence. That you're lighter, brighter, clearer. That you've chosen to invest in your healing instead of holding space for their potential. That you no longer confuse silence with suffering, but with strength. They are learning now what you already understand. That your worth was never tied to how much you could endure, but how boldly you could walk away when your soul wasn't being met. Your absence isn't an empty space, it's a sacred one. A space they didn't know how to honor. A space they now long to return to, not because they've changed, but because they finally recognize its value. But that recognition came too late. The door hasn't just been closed. It's been replaced. The chapter hasn't just ended, it's been rewritten. And you're not waiting anymore, you're not watching, you're not hoping, you're living, fully, authentically, stoically. And while they sit in their silence, grappling with the reflection you left behind, you're building a life that no longer includes the burden of being misunderstood. Let them feel it, not because you want them to hurt, but because some lessons are only learned through loss. And your absence, that's the lesson they'll never forget. If you're walking this path too, if you know what it feels like to be gone in all the right ways, support this message by hitting like, commenting #1 to show you're choosing peace, and subscribing for more wisdom grounded in Stoicism and emotional mastery. Your absence is powerful, your presence is sacred, and your journey is just beginning. They thought you'd chase. They thought your silence was hesitation, not transformation. But now they know. What they once perceived as passivity was actually power under control. What they mistook for weakness was a quiet strength rooted in self-respect, not pride. In the space they left behind, you didn't collapse. You expanded. You stepped into yourself more fully. You grew. You reclaimed everything you once outsourced to someone who didn't know how to hold it. And in doing so, you taught them a lesson no words could deliver, that your love was a privilege, not a guarantee, that your presence was a gift, not a default, and that your silence, far from being empty, was filled with purpose, boundaries, and unshakable inner peace. This isn't about revenge. It's not about proving anything to them. It's about living in alignment with your truth, quietly, deliberately, unapologetically. Let them sit with the void they created. Let them replay the moments they once dismissed. Let them discover that they didn't just lose someone who loved them. They lost someone who was becoming more, with or without them. And as they sit with the echo of what was, you move forward with what is, grounded, centered, whole. You're not bitter, you're not broken, you're not waiting, you are free. And in this freedom, you are no longer their option. You are your own priority. That is the final truth they never saw coming, and it's the one they will never forget.